What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Friday Night Bites. Tonight, I want to talk about something that dawned on me recently on the water. And basically, it's following your instincts, following your own advice, and doing what you know you should do. So let's get this party started.
Welcome to Friday Night Bites, an after-hours paddle and fin production. No holds barred, what's hot and what's not. Latest updates and trends in the industry. Tricks, tips, and more. Weekly updates by none other than the OG himself. Now let's join the one and only podfather, Brian Schiller.
All right, guys. So I hope you enjoyed the last show. We talked about live scope. Matt Gibson was our guest on the show, and it's always a pleasure to have him on and chat it up with him. Matt's a good friend, very knowledgeable fisherman. And I hope you guys took away from that like he and I didn't really have an opinion on the subject. It's just it's been a very talked about thing lately in the fishing community, whether kayak fishing, boat fishing, whatever it may be, right? But overall, I mean, we just named off a bunch of pros and cons that we felt were necessary, and we hope you formulated your own opinion. And at the end of the day, like we both stated, all that matters is that you're getting out there on the water, having a good time, and catching some fish, right? Whether you're using electronics to do that or just knowledge and skill. So, I mean, there's no good or bad or ugly about it. It was just a conversation we thought was necessary. And we didn't want people to feel like they should feel hindered, so to speak, if they didn't have that live scope or live view or whatever it may be. So it was just one of those things where it was like, hey, let's talk about this. This is a good subject. And we hope you guys enjoyed it and so on. So, and then we also recorded a noob show talking about shaky head fishing. And that's where my kind of topic falls into play tonight is, just following your instincts or doing what you think or you should do that will catch you some fish. So in that show talking about shaky head, we were talking about different areas and places to target fish with the shaky head. And it was the next day, I believe, I went out on the water and I was fishing Friday morning, I believe it was. And there was still a few fish up on beds. I was throwing a Texas rig Senko up there, getting a few bites. It was mostly males, fry garden, guarding those beds. And I was looking for bigger fish to catch. And as I looked over to my right-hand side or the deeper side of the water, I cast off the left side of the boat a lot. I just feel like I'm more accurate that way. But I look out to the deeper water, and I was probably sitting in 4 or 5 foot of water. We got some tall weeds, and there was some cuts through those weeds. And I'm like, thought to myself, man, I should really throw shaky head in there, because that was one of the things I had talked about was targeting weed edges. And I knew if I did that, I'd catch fish. But unfortunately, I just didn't do it. I mean, how many times do we find ourselves on the water and we're thinking to ourselves, oh, I should tie this on, or I should tie that on, and I should try to fish this, but we just don't. We're so comfortable in what we're doing in the moment. And I think part of it, for me at least, is, okay, I got this tied on. I'm already working this. Let's just keep working it. I'm catching a few fish, but I'm not catching the fish that I'd like to catch. And I think sometimes, I know I am, maybe all of us, I don't know. I mean, I guess this is just opening it up a discussion and again, creating thought on how to better ourselves as fishermen. And, I kept thinking to myself all that morning, I need to tie on a shaky head and go target this area. And I didn't. And I had a subpar day. I think probably my biggest fish was maybe 3 pounds. So roughly in that 16, 17-inch range, maybe even 18. And I knew there was bigger fish to be had. Those females have just come off bed. They're chomping. They want to feed up. They just did the deed up on the bed. So they're hungry. They're wanting to refuel and get ready to push offshore. Obviously, some of them may stay shallow, but I'm like, man, I went home that night and I'm like, why didn't I follow my own advice? Like, seriously, I just did a whole podcast telling you guys out there, the listeners, hey, you should go target these areas in this particular time in the season. And I just didn't do it. And I know I've done it before. And, it's just one of those things. I think we get overly comfortable in the patterns we're used to working at certain times of the year, and we don't think about it. Like, I'm not sure if Matt and I talked about it in that podcast, but he's been fishing topwater. Topwater to me, since I've been a young boy, has always been like that summer bite. But I know so many guys that are successful, like, early summer, late spring, even early spring, fall, tail end of the fall when it starts to get cold and they're still getting topwater bites, but I never throw it. So I think it's one of those things where, we know that tying on that specific pattern or fishing that certain style, in a style that we're even comfortable with, we kind of put off to the side and we just kind of, yeah, I could do that, but why? It's one of those things. I guess I play that game in my mind a little bit. And I want to back that up a little bit. I know back when I was a heavier tournament fisherman and I was traveling around the country fishing, I remember that first event. Well, I did a local event first before I went on the road. And in that local event, I kind of did the same thing. I got lazy. I did catch fish, had a decent event. I think I placed in the top 10. I might have been like 9th or 10th or something like that. Not great, but it could have been better because it was a tougher day for some folks. And I knew what to target and I just didn't do it. It was dumb. So I remember leaving that event and I'm like, look, you're about to embark on this journey, spend a lot of time, money, and effort on fishing this national trail. And you need to do everything you can to cash a check, basically. And that's always the object as a tournament fisherman is you want to be in that upper 10, cashing a check, going home with a little money, maybe at least breaking even, from all your expenses and stuff. So I kind of like sat down and I was like, what do I need to do to better myself as a fisherman? What's going to make me successful at this? And get me the best overall return for my efforts. And the only thing I could come up with was, I was very knowledgeable. I kind of think that, when it comes to figuring fish out, I'm usually pretty good at that. I'm decent at electronics at that time. Side scan was something I dove into. It's something I talk about all the time and how I utilize it. And that was about that period of time I did it. My planning was on par. I was doing map study, like picking out spots to check off the list as I was going out pre-fishing. But I'm like, there's something missing, something that I'm missing there. And I basically came up with the conclusion like, hey, you are comfortable with like these 3 or 4 patterns. You need to learn more ways to fish. Um, pattern wise, and when I say pattern, I mean baits or styles and things like that. And not only that, but don't be afraid to change that bait. So come first event, I believe it was in Kansas, I went out and I started, I forget what I started with. The lake I was on had a bunch of submerged trees. And to me, that screamed flip a jig, right? Flip a jig with a craw trailer in there up against that wood, drag it away from the trunk. You should get smacked. Sure enough, the first few hours, I was like not getting hit. And I'm like, hey, dummy, start changing baits. So I change colors, end up getting bit. I'm like, okay, great. I'm starting to pick up on something. This color wasn't working, but this color is. So fast forward to the actual event. I go out. It's windy as all get out. There was like some 2 to 3 foot chop on the water. And, a lot of fishermen were stuck in bays or shielded points out of that wind. And my jig bite went away. And I remembered, hey, dummy, change your bait if it isn't working. And I started changing, tying on new stuff. I'd fish it for 15, 20 minutes. If I wasn't getting bit, guess what? It was coming off and something new was going on. And I figured it out. And I ended up putting together a decent limit by the end of event day. And I'd say probably 3 of the 5 fish I had in my bag came in that last hour and a half. And I caught a bunch of fish in that last hour and a half, 2 hours when I figured out, hey, they're not biting this jig, but I can catch them on a Texas rig Senko, just casting it out and working it slow back, and they were smacking it. Caught a bunch of short fish, but ended up sorting through all kinds of fish to actually scratch together a decent limit that ended me up in like 8th place. And I'm like, this is what I need to do. So moving forward through that season, I kept that in the back of the mind, like, hey, you need to keep changing baits till you figure out what they're biting. And then you could dial in on colors, dial in on areas, things like that. And I did that, and I had an overall successful year. But towards the end of that season and going into the championship, I figured out a bite. Conditions had changed, but I didn't change. So it's adapting, right? Adapting on the fly to your conditions, things like that. Something that we all know how to do, but how many times have we gone out, figured out a bite, weather conditions change, the bite changes, and we don't try to adjust? Kind of similar to what I'm talking about, right? So it's one of those things like, I'm like, I got to do a podcast about this and just kind of talk about it, because I know I'm not the only one. I've had conversations with other friends and anglers that kind of get stuck in that same rut and they don't think to change. I think some of the most successful fishermen and women out there, that's what they do. They adapt. That's what makes them so farther advanced. So the big question that comes into play is like, how long do I keep approaching this technique before I change over? And it's kind of subjective, right? Like if you're up here in the north, I mean, I give it half hour, 45 minutes. If you're not getting bit, change it up. Try something different. Maybe try a different, you know, piece of water to fish, different depth, different structure, things like that. If you're down in Tennessee on like TVA waterways where they got dams and water running, I've had that too, where pre-fishing, the dams are open, currents flowing, tournament day, it runs for the first 4 hours and then it gets shut off. And that changes fishing a ton. I mean, I was on the Nickajack tournament back in 2019, KBF, FLW, all through pre-fishing. Man, I was on fish, and I'm like on good fish. And talking to some folks at the actual captain's meeting, you know, people were kind of like, I don't know, this is going to be tough. Some people found some fish, some didn't. And I spent a decent amount of time pre-fishing, got on some bites, and honed in on a certain structure type that those fish were relating to. And I had a game plan. Went out, hammered on them. Many of you may have heard this story before, but through the tournament, didn't have a leash on my cell phone. Fish pops off the board, hits my phone, in the water it goes. Then a storm rolls in while I'm running back to the truck to get a GoPro so I could get photos to submit for the tournament. And, it was obviously that storm rolls in, and it was heavy thunderstorms, winds, rain, all that stuff. And it really affected the fish. And at the same time, they had kind of stopped the water earlier that morning. So where I was fishing was further down the lake or river section, and that current pretty much stopped. And those fish went into some other areas. They were still in that area, but they kind of moved deeper into the water column because there wasn't as much current to fight. So when I get back out there, I'm like, man, I'm throwing my jig at the time and not getting bit. Can't buy a bite. I'm like, I just blew this tournament, A, because I just lost a phone that's going to cost me $1,000 to replace for day 2. B, the water shut off, the storm rolled in. It was theoretically the perfect storm, right? It definitely killed my day until I was like, hey, dummy, you need to change your bait, change your area, do something different. So I went into a back bay where there is no current and there's resident fish. And I wasn't catching the quality of fish, but I was at least catching fish. And that was enough to put a bag together and complete my day with a full string or a full 5 fish on the board. Going into day 2 was the same thing. My bite that I figured out pre-fishing was non-existent. So I knew, okay, let's go back to what we were doing yesterday afternoon and fish that style. Put together a 5 fish limit. Wasn't the greatest, wasn't one of my best finishes, but I didn't give up, and I kept changing baits and I kept catching fish. So it's just one of those things where you got to strategize, have a backup plan for a backup plan for a backup plan, and don't be afraid to fish what your instincts are telling you. I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I think just me talking about it, me thinking about it so much this past week coming up to this show, it's like, don't be afraid. Don't hesitate. You know what your instincts are. You know what you've seen on a YouTube video or a pro doing a tournament, or you've done in previous experiences, or maybe it's something you haven't done previously and you're a little hesitant to try something new and different because you don't want to waste that valuable time that you have on the water, tournament or not. Right? Like, every minute on the water is valuable to every fisherman and woman across the world, right? And you want to take as much potential time on the water with the most successful, how do I word this? That time on the water is precious and it's limited. So you want to maximize your potential for the maximum amount of catches, if that makes sense. So I think we need to just I mean me, but maybe you guys feel the same way or are the same way. And maybe some of you beginner fishermen just haven't really thought about it, maximize your bite potential when the bite is tough. When what you're throwing isn't working, don't be afraid to cut that off. Tie on something new. And after 15, 20 casts, if that's not working, don't be afraid to cut it off and try something else new, or try a different area of water as well. If it's relatively close to where you're fishing. I know fishing can seem so complicated, and we all make it complicated as anglers, but in reality, it's fairly simple if we follow our instincts, follow our knowledge, and give it 100% effort rather than maybe 60%. I think the more often you change baits, the more often you're going to be successful. So that's kind of my topic for this week that I wanted to share with you guys. One of my experiences that I hoped would maybe open or help you guys realize, or maybe do something different on the water and make that trip a little more successful, and maybe not be as hesitant to try something new or different. So before we move on to the next thing, I just want to play this quick iCast promo. We're going to be at iCast this year, live streaming, doing podcasts from the Dubro fishing booth once again. And we're looking forward to seeing all our friends and fishing family down there at iCast this year. And we hope you guys are looking forward to hearing some of those podcasts. And if you guys have somebody you want to hear from or see a product or something like that throughout iCast week, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to see if we can get that person or product on one of the shows, so that way you guys can check it out and get a firsthand look. All right, guys. Wanted to also talk about Eric Siddiqui coming out, swinging for the fences at the Bassmaster Kayak Series class, geez, that's a tongue twister, guys. The Bassmaster Kayak Series event down on Lake Gunnersville this past weekend. And I saw a press release about the event, and there was a little bit of an interview in there from Eric. And, he stated that he felt like he had lost his touch or forgot how to fish. He's been dealing with some family stuff. His father had passed away last year, I believe it was. So he's been dealing with that and trying to get on the water as much as possible, but not as much as he'd liked, so to speak. And it's good to see him back up there on the leaderboard. Ohio native, guy is a hammer. Obviously, we all know he's won the Bassmaster Kayak Series Classic at the Bassmaster Classic in the past. And Gunnersville is one of those lakes that he always does well on. And it was interesting because in there, he stated that, he was working this point that had some grass on it, and it quickly dropped off into 30 feet, and those fish would move up and down. He was throwing some top water, throwing some other things, and he's like, I knew I wasn't going to catch fish all day, but I knew I would catch the right fish. And I believe it stated that he caught 5 or 6 fish roughly each day, and obviously won the event. They were the good fish that everybody looks for come tournament day. He had back-to-back 90-plus inch days for, I think he had 180, it was 187, 88, maybe 89 inches. But a hell of a bag, hell of an accomplishment. Eric Siddiqui is no stranger to winning kayak tournaments. So just wanted to give a huge shout out to him. It's good to see him back on that leaderboard again, like I said. And just continuing on with his legacy in kayak fishing. Super cool. Previous podcast host Dan Perry was up there. I believe he placed 18th place. And some other friends of mine as well placed up there high. So it was good to see everybody there. And it's been great to see the Bassmaster Kayak Series really thriving. I believe they had over 200 kayaks in that event or close to it. And it seems like Bassmaster's really killing it this year. Steve Owens is doing a phenomenal job. Shout out to Steve and the things he's accomplished. You know, I remember when Bassmaster introduced the kayak series, and it kind of started off okay, and then it kind of went downhill real quick. And I think part of it is you had a boat organization trying to run a kayak organization, and they didn't really know much about that world. And they finally got some people in there and involved a lot more and started listening, and look at how successful it's been, you know. So that's great to see, and great for the sport of kayak fishing. I mean, the amount of exposure coming out of that has been phenomenal. And that's not to discount what Hobie's done or KBF or any of the other, you know, organizations across the nation, you know. Um, but it's phenomenal to see these huge turnouts in the kayak events. Hobie's been doing it for years, KBF before that. And it's great to see the Bassmaster series actually thriving and doing really well. So just wanted to touch on that a little bit, guys and gals. I appreciate all the positive feedback that everybody's been given. You know, I kind of wanted to do this kind of shorter form podcast type show, um, which kind of helps engage and maybe better you on the water, both on and off, and just get you thinking a little bit more and hopefully making you a little bit more successful on the water. So, appreciate you guys tuning in for another episode. I know it's kind of a little shorter than last week's, but man, I love sharing my experiences, both good and bad, my dumb mistakes, so that way you guys don't have to make them. But I hope you enjoyed the subject tonight, and I look forward to chatting with you guys next week. Be on the lookout for iCast. We're all super excited. We've been talking about it. I know myself, John Rapp, Randy Newton, and Matt Gibson will all be down there. And we're looking forward to bringing you some great content from iCast 2024. Huge shout out to Dubro Fishing for letting me record my podcast in the studio here tonight. And be on the lookout for some new products that we're releasing at iCast 2024 that are kayak related. I think you guys are going to really dig it. Be some good stuff. So be on the lookout. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. As always, tight lines and smooth paddling. Peace.